Now we'll go back to the
8. Number 8.
No?
Number 8.
Number 8. Okay, now staff, do you want to just make a quick overview of the why? Why are we doing this? And just a brief synopsis of the history and how we've got to this point in time. And then I know councillors have got some questions for you.
Okay, so this scope is in response to a resolution by the Greater Christchurch Partnership that's agreed to undertake this process in this manner. Is addressing the requirements of the National Policy Statement that requires us to develop a future development strategy. So,
and that's because we are one of the
partners of the Greater Christchurch Partnership and one of the high growth areas.
The high growth areas. So yes. This is a legal requirement.
It is, indeed.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want to talk about the history?
In terms of the history, as you'll be familiar, that we've had a future development strategy. It's called the Urban Development Strategy. In 2016 there was an update provided to that strategy to sort of bring it into today's environment, but what that didn't do is look at some of the land use aspects, and so it was recognised we needed to do that, and it's now being done in conjunction with the obligation that we have to do it coming out of the National Policy Statement.
There's also updated population projections that happens every few years, and so this will also be a direct response to those. And some, I suppose, new, more detailed aspects that we have to cover through addressing any shortfalls of development capacity is looking not just at location, which the UDS and our district plans tend to look at, but also looking at matters such as typologies and price points, so meeting the demand for particular price points and particular typologies, which we haven't in the past had to go down to that detail. So that's quite important when you consider the huge demand for affordable housing into the future.
Right. Okay, so questions. Vicky?
So given the need to address the demand for affordable housing and the huge increase that there will be in the demand for social housing, given the lack of ownership, given the statistics which show that ownership of housing has dropped dramatically, and there is a huge wave of people who will come to age 65 and not own a house and who will need social housing. Can this also address, given that it's mostly about Selwyn and Waimak since our district scheme is done, can it also address the need for the social infrastructure in Selwyn and Waimak so that those demands don't all fall on just the city as they currently do?
Okay, so it's not about Selwyn and Waimak, it's about the Greater Christchurch area, the future development strategy. So to be clear, it does cover Christchurch City and it does cover the required demand for more affordable housing, including social housing, so that's a component of it. And yes, it does include the demand that can be met in how Selwyn and Waimak can contribute to that as well, meeting that demand. So it's across the board.
So it will cover
yes, it will. It must cover it.
Beyond the city?
Yes.
Yes, beyond. So it's the Greater Christchurch Partnership area.
I think is there some confusion that the proposed change to the regional policy statement, almost you might consider it as an interim change to that's been purported to just look at the Selwyn and Waimak medium-term shortfall. That's what that is about. So there is a proposal to consider or to undertake a Section 32 analysis to look at a proposed change to the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement, but that's actually a separate matter than what this matter is about.
I've tried to explain in a very short paragraph that there are two tracks and it's a separate process, and actually we've probably got a greater issue that we need to address in terms of the regional policy statement change and ensuring that it is focused on the length of term that it's intended to be focused on and not ending up in the long term too early.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to be very clear, at the moment the demand for social infrastructure falls on the city. Selwyn and Waimak do not meet any of the demand. or a minor, tiny amount of the demand. So what I just want to be very clear on is that you've talked about affordable housing, which is great for those who can afford to buy a house, but for those who can't, that they will have the ability to remain in their community when they need social housing, and that it will be provided, and that if we have the capacity in this to push for that, that it is included specifically. So just to be very clear.
Yes, so as part of, that's another one of the outcomes the city would be expecting that Selwyn and Waimak, through their proposed change to the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement, even looking at the medium term, that they provide for the range of housing typologies such that would provide for more affordable housing.
And
so that comes down to densities.
Affordable in both rental and
and social housing?
Now, the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement is not the mechanism to. It depends how far you expect the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement to go in terms of dealing directly to social housing, and it's not the method to do that.
It's a land use document.
It is a land use.
So land use and, yeah, I mean, it's more about density than it is about, you know, with who owns it, the housing, whether it's social housing or whether it's affordable.
So social housing is a mechanism to address, as is various forms of housing. This is talking about typologies and understanding those typologies.
Sorry to be persistent, but this is a future development strategy. We know the issue. We know that all of the Selwyn and Waimak issues come into the city at the moment. What I'm trying to ensure is that affordable for many people looking forward will be social housing. Sorry to say, but that is the reality. So does it actually, and can it specifically include that? So I'm sorry to persist with it, but
yes. So the future development strategy is a local government. It's developed under the Local Government Act, but it's a direct response to the National Policy Statement for Urban Development Capacity. Within that, it is up to the Greater Christchurch Partnership how far it wishes to go into providing maybe actions or implementation as part of that would address or look to begin to address the matter of provision.
The short answer is yes.
So can we, do we need to add to the recommendations such that when it goes back to the committee, the Greater Christchurch Partnership, that it specifically addresses...
So that would be part of the feedback that would go into the development of the draft.
Yeah, so can we just could we have a noting recommendation, another noting, which says that note that the city would have an expectation that social housing will be a component of of all three
of the solutions
of the three of the two districts as well as the city.
Yes.
Yep. Component of the two districts. The two districts?
Selwyn and Waimak.
Yeah, I know, but the two districts.
The Greater Christchurch area.
Yeah. Yes, I know, but
you're trying to say
we provide for the Greater Christchurch area. There are two districts that
border Christchurch City.
Yeah.
Greater Christchurch District.
The city will have an expectation that it will be a component of the two districts as well as Christchurch City. Okay, Yanni?
Thank you. So when we previously discussed this, I thought we agreed to approach the minister or the ministers from the previous government when this came in around why we were being asked to do it, given that we'd done a land use recovery plan and we'd done our district plan review and we'd done a UDS refresh / update.
We did. We actually, the Greater Christchurch Partnership met with the minister and specifically requested that we not meet these timeframes. Yep. But I have to say that there is no time left not to proceed.
So just so I'm clear, so that was the previous government or
the
new government?
Current one.
So the current government still wants us to do this?
There has been no change to the timelines from the current government.
And have we got a process to actually logically go back to them and say, we're concerned. We've just had all this work done in this area and we're just having to duplicate?
Well, it's not a duplication because it is actually, I mean, as I say, there's a link to the other stream of work, but it is a requirement to do it. We're in the high growth category, and the high growth category is significantly driven off Waimakariri and Selwyn, not Christchurch.
The
And
other
yet
point.
we're paying for most of this.
No. We're contributing staff.
There's two important components here. One is that the land use recovery plan and the changes to the regional policy statement only dealt with growth to 2028. We have to deal with growth to 2048. Also, to do any integrated planning with transport, we have to look at the land use or the development capacity requirements to 2048 to support any joint position on land use and transport.
And a lot of that work's already been done through the UDS.
Yeah, and I think government have recognised that if the work's been done, then the job becomes that much smaller. So we cut our cloth accordingly, but what we do is we ensure that the strategy brings through that wealth of work that's been done to show we don't need to do too much more. So
I'm just trying to understand, like, the possible outcome of this, doing it through Greater Christchurch Partnership. Does it have to be done through the Greater Christchurch Partnership, or could we just do this as a city council?
It absolutely has to be at a Greater Christchurch level because it has regional significance. The impact of growth in Selwyn and Waimak and providing for just what you mentioned before about the huge challenge of affordable housing, and that's a Greater Christchurch issue.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand if it's a legal requirement or whether it's...
No.
Right, so we could choose to do it as a city.
We
if we wanted
can,
to.
but it strongly recommends, especially when we've got an established UDS, which is looking at addresses the Greater Christchurch area, but it strongly advises that councils, where there particularly is crossover boundary issues, that they work together to address the urban growth issues for that, area.
That's in the MPS.
But can I just say, this is the scoping paper. This is
indeed.
not the draft that's going out
right.
for public consultation.
Beginning of the process.
You know, and it was made very clear. You know, and I'll acknowledge Sarah Templeton as the one of the representatives on the Greater Christchurch Partnership. Absolutely crystal clear that it was to come back to us. So the original staff recommendation that went to the Greater Christchurch Partnership was that this council delegate the decision making to the Greater Christchurch Partnership. We've said no, and a case was made and that was accepted, and so the draft will come back.
Right.
And what I'm giving an undertaking to today is that we will workshop the draft in detail before it comes back to council for a decision. This is the scoping paper.
I understand that, but this is the start of this process, and I believe once we agree to this and ratify it, then it's very hard to change some key elements of it. Now, for some of us who have had history with the UDS, and what we saw was the community wanted us not to go and spread out into the green fields. That was overwhelming from the public submissions, but because of the decision-making process on it, it basically didn't, that wasn't the outcome of it. What the outcome was urban sprawl at the expense of more dense population in the central city and in the inner city. And what we had as a result is huge motorways being built, and what we've seen since the UDS has come in, a lack of focus on affordable and social housing. There were actions around that in the UDS, and they were never really given much effect to. It was all about providing infrastructure to support urban sprawl, which led to the motorways being built. And so what I'm concerned about is the decision making around this. The question is really, are we confident that the decision making around this is going to lead to the best outcomes for the city, as opposed to our neighbouring territorial authorities who seem to have everything to gain from this, and we seem to have the most to lose.
Can I just say that there's a parallel process that we need to be briefed on, and we need to work through a number of those issues. This is not the form. This is not the place for that. But I can't persuade you around the council table, and I think we just need to move on and accept that.
There's no time for a workshop on this before we ratify it today.
It's the scoping. I promise that there will be a workshop before we consider the draft.
Okay, and the second question was around the housing targets that are mentioned in this report. Have they been set, or when do they get set, and how do we feed into that?
No, they haven't been set. What's been identified as 3 options for those minimum targets, and they again have to come back to council.
So is there a kind of, in the process overview that we've got, it says sequential and parallel work components. Have we got a kind of understanding of the process for agreeing certain things?
Sorry, how do you mean?
Well, like things like the minimum housing targets, for example, like it's just not clear from me, from reading this, around how we actually make decisions around things like the minimum housing targets, whether that's the hearings panel that gets to do it.
No, so it'll be part of the workshop and part of the process, and it's part of the technical work that the staff are doing.
Sorry, I'm trying to understand who makes the decisions.
Well,
finally they come back to
ultimately it comes back here.
So the future development strategy has within it, will have within it the minimum targets. It's, to be fair, it's not actually clear which goes. The minimum targets have to be put into the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement by December this year. Ideally, the future development strategy gets signed off, and as part of that, the minimum targets are set within it, and then so that's decided by each authority, and then it gets put into the regional policy statement.
Glenn.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to see the drill down to price points and typology, and I'm just wondering, with what sits behind this discussion is a principle which we pick up in Christchurch City's own housing policy, that being inclusionary zoning. So obviously, you know, explicitly affordable housing development is provided for, of which social housing itself is a subset. So what would be, if this is the scoping and it's about land use, is this the place to begin that conversation, or is that further on with the actual workshopping and draft?
Yes, I think we need to do a workshop bringing options forward to you about how, also what document is best to tackle what aspect of it. Some of it might be certainly the future development strategy. Might be signalling further work to be required. It can't solve everything, but it certainly can set out maybe a program of work or some initiatives by which to solve the problem or look towards solving the problem. And so I think that's the most appropriate way to actually bring that to you, as what's been done to date, what more needs to be done, and what other options are there to tackle the issue.
Would that
because
be
it's
the
quite
place?
A complex issue.
Yeah, if we had a discussion over, e.g., 25% would be, you know, affordable in our land use. That, okay, great. Do we need to note that today, Mayor, or as well? Do you think?
Sorry, what was that?
Just noting inclusionary zoning as a part of that conversation over social housing.
I think that's all part of the
I
conversation.
think it's part of the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, yep.
Dion?
Thank you. In the document, there's a little part around the integration with other processes, and it's Central City and Avon Alta, the Avon River corridor. Quite interesting to note that actually it says that the regeneration plan is likely to be released for consultation in August, which is nice to know. I suppose that's nice to find out in these reports. But the thing I'm worried about is, does this type of thing over or supersede the work that's actually already going to be done? So let's say this 2 years of work that's been going on for the regeneration strategy, and they say, nah, we don't want any buildings to be built in there. And then all of a sudden you get this thing going over top and say, actually, we think we need some growth in these areas and we're going to sort of test the boundaries or something.
So just a clarification, there's a public exhibition that begins this Saturday on Otakarao Avon River Corridor. Within that there is extent of the work that's been undertaken, part of that is saying the fact that there's very limited opportunity for residential development. So really the outcome of that work is to say that whilst we can expect, there's opportunities to do some innovative new housing, it won't be of the scale that would probably put a drop in the bucket of what to meet this demand that actually is required.
So this is just saying we're not blind to those other things.
Yeah, but what I'm saying here is that we're doing, there's an agency out there doing this work over here in a regeneration strategy. This is going to come in over top. And if the people who are doing this don't agree with that strategy, they can actually say something over top and actually sort of start development.
I personally work with the team on the Otakaroa Avon River, so I'm fully aware of what opportunities were available in that land, and that's actually part. We actually work quite closely. It's not this one. I suppose the future development strategy is looking for opportunities of where to house people. That's one of the fundamental outcomes it's seeking to do. So, and what it looks to is to say, well, in that corridor, is there any opportunity? And the outcome of that work that's been undertaken is no, that's quite limited, but it may present some, as I said, some innovative ideas for maybe more affordable housing. But it's not going to be at the scale. When you look at the numbers, again, it will come back to a workshop on this, but when you look at the numbers that we have to try and provide for, it's quite significant. So, and I mean, that's the challenge ahead that the future development strategy has to tackle.
Pauline?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. My question's around transport, and it's also about integration. So that we know that that we are, and it's stated here that the strategic transport directions set out in these documents will provide an important contribution to the FDS statement. However, we know that in the GPS, transport is being prioritised over land use. In other words, land use should occur around existing transport routes and for efficiencies and functionality. So is that, I mean, it's a chicken and an egg, and I don't particularly think that wording actually supports the priority of transport.
Yes, I mean, if the part of if you go back to the UDS strategic directions, that's quite clearly stated that transport and land use have to be integrated. That's actually it's part of the vision, it's part of the strategic goals, it's part of everybody's strategic priorities in Selwyn, Waimak and the city. So
it's gone beyond that.
It has.
Transport is being aligned as the first, and then the land use is around the existing routes.
So yes, the same team that is working on the GPS is the same team that's working on this work.
Yes.
And so yes, we're having those very conversations within the team structures that are developing this, which one drives which, and there certainly has looking as part of, again, when I come back to what is the one of the sole outcomes of this is where do we house people in the best location to support those public transport corridors and so forth. So that is actually one of the key principles of developing the FDS.
It's very fundamental.
Sarah?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just two quick things. Firstly, at the last Greater Christchurch Partnership meeting, we asked again about the feasibility tests and the timeframes, and whether we had formally written to get those potentially changed. So the feasibility tests on how feasible, the assessments to see how feasible the developments are, and the timeframes. Have we done that yet?
We've delayed writing to the Minister because we've had some fruitful discussions with officials. Up till now we hadn't. So we wanted the letter to be crafted in a way that was positive and had solutions rather than problems.
Great.
So we can report those separately in terms of what those positive discussions have led to, probably at the next committee meeting.
Great.
But we think that there's now a much better understanding between government and local government about what's the pragmatic way of dealing with these issues that we've got to deal with.
Yeah. And the other one, just quickly, would it be fair to say, they're tagging with a question at the beginning, would it be fair to say that the fact that all of the councils need to ratify this at the very end of the process means that both Selwyn and Waimakariri need to also make sure that they do things in a way that will get our sign off?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah, so mine's just it's just a double-barreled question. In most of our reports, we often have the financial implications, so we know how much it's costing us. It doesn't really say in here, and so my question's around what is the cost of all of this, and then what's the measurable outcomes at the end?
So predominantly the costs are in staff time. So we have...
well, the staff and consultants.
Yep. So
and who picks up all the bill for the consultants? Because I noticed in the breakdown, our FTEs are 3.5, but others are just putting in 0.3, with the exception of ECAN, which is a 1.
So because this project's being dealt with collaboratively, the budget that councils contribute to the partnership itself and the running of the partnership will pay for the costs associated with this project. It's primarily to write a document. There has been some evidence-based work that's occurred already, but what you've got in front of you is minimal cost. Its implications are huge, but then they're picked up through district plans and LTPs, and that's where you're making the actual decisions on those costings.
Yeah, Vicky. Oh,
Sorry, just one more question. It's not on housing, but it is on the fact that this goes through till 2048, by which time New Zealand and Christchurch City have to be just about carbon neutral. So and if you look at the latest Productivity Commission report, there is a massive impact on land use. How does climate change and the effects of that, apart from coastal hazards, factor into this?
I mean, it's one of the issues that's raised, and I suppose because this is fundamentally a land use and transport directed document, that it's, whilst again it may refer to future programs of work or initiatives, being that its focus is on land use and transport, that would be where we'd have to see some initiatives that are going towards carbon neutrality.
So given that transport is the key one, and land use is 50% basically, but of the remainder, transport is the other key one. Can we make sure that within the framework of the way we measure the outcomes that we want, that climate change is factored in there? Again,
it's one of the strategic goals, priorities, I can't remember the directions of the UDS currently, and we expect that that's going to be carried through, and therefore it will have to show an action plan towards how to achieve that.
Make it explicit, given
this is the framework. So can we add a note that that there is an expectation that the current strategic framework of the UDS, including its focus on climate change, is carried through into the future development strategy? Is that okay? Tim?
Thank you. Just on the social housing aspect, with regards to Selwyn and Waimak, they're going through their LTP as we are. Do we know what their component in there with regards to social housing is? Because if this is a future document and we are a partnership, we take pride in our social housing, we have issues, and at the moment all I can see is if they have none, and they have none in their LTP, that's a 10-year document with implications further on. So do we know if they, or can we look at that to see how long they're going to be in this for, how much they're going to put in?
We'll have to ask them, and again, being that will be a focus of or an expectation now that we address that as part of the FDS, then we'll be asking that of them.
I have raised this issue with the Minister about the lack of connection between the time frames. So we do an LTP, and then we go into a regional transport plan and go into a public transport plan after the LTP, and this process is another one after the LTP. So I think that we wouldn't have an expectation that that outcomes in relation to this process and that they're going through a district plan review, both of them as well, at the moment, so that will carry on for quite some time.
But it would be disappointing to see our partners in this not having any vision over social housing, because our rate.
But it hasn't been raised with them.
But if they have none,
Yes, but it hasn't been raised with them yet. What I'm saying is that we can't look to their LTP. What we can do is we can say that Christchurch City has an expectation that social housing will be a component of the two districts as well as Christchurch City. We can talk that through with them.
And we can look at their LTP proposal to see, and if there is nothing in there with regards to social housing, we could ask them, what is their vision of the future?
The timing's the wrong way.
No,
you know, that's what I keep saying. They're doing their LTP now.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying if there is no forward vision of them doing and responsible for social housing, then we can ask them what their vision was, so we have a better understanding of what our partners are expecting in the future, which is definitely this document.
Yeah, that's what we want to do.
Yeah. But at the moment, it seems to have been fallen off the wagon, so to speak.
But it hasn't been raised with them. That's what I'm saying. It's chicken and egg.
Yeah, so something's so important, and we're saying it's so important.
Raise that through this process.
Yeah. Yanni.
Just obviously the housing issues come up quite a lot. My understanding is that there's supposed to be a greater Christchurch housing policy. Is that in place, or will that be in place to inform these targets?
So it is a priority action in the update. It hasn't been progressed as yet. We've kind of been focused on some of this immediate work that's got statutory deadlines, but it's still a desire as expressed in that 2016 update. And I think the City Council's housing policy forms a good sort of platform to take that forward.
But picking up on the point, like, you know, obviously Housing New Zealand, MB, have got some interest in housing provision now as well. We've got an action to do something around a greater Christchurch housing policy. It hasn't been done, and now we're being asked to look at targets without doing that policy. Could it be done as part of this, so that we had that kind of common understanding across government and across the region, as we were supposed to have done in the greater Christchurch update from last time?
As Sarah said, given that this has got a land use transport focus, I think there'll be elements that we can pick up in that, but then there'll be other elements that are in the housing policy at a Christchurch level that won't sit easily in the document we're in front of us, but could be signalled as actions and programs of work to take forward. Is kind of where's it best placed to progress these things.
I think that falls out of this document.
Yes. You've heard the concerns. Like for some of us, you know, going back to the start of the UDS, social and affordable housing always seems to be the last cab off the rank. Work never seems to progress on it. And yet
2006 or 2007, that's when the UDS was developed. We had an earthquake since then. There have been changes made to it through the land use recovery plan, and it had to be adapted as a result of those changes that were made. Not all of those changes were acceptable to the council, but they were changes that were made under a framework that we had nothing to do with.
And you will find
we have a statutory deadline to meet with this. This is the scoping document. Can we please leave these bigger questions to when we actually address the draft that's going to go out for public consultation, if it ever does? Pauline.
Acronym SPR, what's that, please?
Settlement Pattern Review.
Thank you.
Sorry, moved by Sarah, seconded by Phil. Is there any discussion? I'll put the Okay, we're going to have to move on to another item on the agenda because we've got such a short time frame for the. If we're going to all debate it again after questions, then can we? I know that I've moved. Leanne, we've moved and seconded, but can we
Leanne,
defer
can I
this
say,
to another item?
Please.
Another meeting.
Yeah.
No,
another. I just want to deal with the Antarctic strategy and then come back to it. Okay.
Just in terms of the order, Leanne, because clearly we're going to have a workshop on this, I don't feel we're compelled to debate it today.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. People are entitled to debate it. So I'm sorry, team. Can you hang around and can I invite the team together forward for the Antarctic strategy paper and we'll move on to that.